Okay, so to summarize for issue one, we are currently leaning towards one system for measuring cards, one system for measuring, like practice speeches, and then one system for meetings, and then that was determined who does the most work, which does most of the determining for who gets to travel. Okay, lateness to meetings. So we're gonna start to start on time. And then we're also going to have people like let us know ahead of time if they're gonna be late. And kind of just start enforcing that. Mostly because like the people that did show up on time don't feel like sitting there for a whole bunch of time. So new system, let us know how long we have to wait. Otherwise, we start on time. Recording in or do so. Does anyone have a suggestion or rebuttal
I have a
issue?
thought on lateness to meetings that I'd just like to introduce to the record if it's okay. I'll
Okay.
do my best to get over it, but one of my personality characteristics is I really don't like being late. I show up early to things. If you are late, just let me know. I have ADHD, so nothing is better than having something scheduled and then canceled at the last minute. It makes me so productive, and I get a bunch of like house. So I don't mind people canceling stuff or if stuff comes up, whatever. But it is very frustrating to show up to something that you prepared for and just have no one be there and not know why. Just very clear communication is so much preferred. Even if you have to cancel stuff, I do not mind if you cancel stuff. Like I said, it's a great little thrill every time I have an appointment canceled. So don't even worry about it. But please don't be late.
Yeah, for like private meetings, like not private, but like one-on-one and stuff that is on Calendly, definitely it's worse to be late than to cancel. Uh, recording slash note taking. We should get into the habit of taking notes whenever possible because we will remember more and so then we can share them with other people. We should be recording lectures and then like sharing them very privately, I think, so that it's like people have access to the thing. But it's maybe like unlisted on YouTube or something. Thoughts on either of these?
We have like
And obviously, let people know when
I know you
they're
said
recording.
I know you said recordings privately. Uh, could we have a section in the Dropbox that just has like a specific part in our personal folder we could add recordings into there?
Sure. So places. Now, my recommendation is maybe instead of Dropbox, you use like YouTube Unlisted, and then you have a link that you share with very specific people. So maybe, like we could have a thread that's just links to recordings, or I can keep track of it in like Google Sheets or something. But otherwise, it will just like take up a whole bunch of space on people's Dropboxes, and then also in turn their hard drive unless they're disabling download, but then it gets complicated. And also, I think that YouTube Unlisted is just like good, like broad strokes practices for people to get into the habit of using, because that is also how I would recommend you do like record your rounds, which I think everyone should be doing. You can get like a really like cheap old phone or iPad and like record stuff and then just in between rounds uploading it to YouTube, and then you set it to unlisted and then you share it only with who you want to share it. How do you feel about that, David?
That works.
Cool. Event scheduling. We should be scheduling stuff in the Discord events um, section. So if you go to, your Discord, let me see if I can show y'all mine. No, I cannot. Well, rats. There we go. Okay, so with Discord, you have your events here. We're around like Friday, I'll set up something that will have this sync to like Google Calendar. So then from there, you're able to sync it, and get like notifications for your phone. But anything that you're scheduling, put it in the events section first. Why? Because it is using Discord, and then we don't want to have like a million different systems. We want to have Discord and Dropbox as like the minimal amount of systems possible to simplify everything. Thoughts on scheduling stuff?
Does that go for like personal meetings too?
Um, if you want many coaches and people there, then yes. Like you don't have to put your event, but I wouldn't go and have like a secondary, system where and you're like, okay, I created like a Google Calendar for this particular team or this particular component of the squad, because then that's when we have two different scheduling systems. So it's like if you don't want to use the events, that's fine, but I would try to use it as much as possible so that we're all doing the same thing so that we get into the habit and there's sort of a workflow there. So we'll say this is like one of those. Um, you don't have to if you don't want to, but do so when possible. Cool. Dropbox usage. Any assignment that was on the big board should make its way to your personal folder by the time you claim to be done with it. There are like questions oftentimes about like, what if I'm not ready to share this with everyone? You are allowed to like if you think there's someone who's not very good with technology and like doesn't know what do not break means, it happens. You can keep stuff off the Dropbox. Once it has been broken, it should always make its way to your Dropbox. And if you've like completed a certain assignment and you've checked it as completed, but it's not in your Dropbox, it does not count as completed. So we want, like, if something is going to sit in your personal folder forever and ever and you're not actually going to break it, don't, like, give people access to it because then it doesn't do good for anyone. We want everyone sharing their stuff with each other while also, breaking it in strategic opportunities. So, like, if two people are neg and they both have a fantastic opportunity to break the same K in the same round at the same time, then it's like that gives us an extra competitive advantage. We want to create situations where that is done. That's on Dropbox usage.
I think for the only concern I would have for that is probably some exception to like things we work on the big board, i.e. things that are like case negatives or K file like a master K file link, etc. Things like that. Just because I think it would be beneficial for the entire team to have in itself. I know I'm
Yeah.
cutting like three case negs right now, so I feel like that should be one of the exceptions of like you can't keep that one for yourself. It should be in like your Dropbox.
Yeah, there's no reason to, not put up the case next because the case next is we all work together to prep out every single, you know, team, but if you have like a really specific K link to a very specific team and you want to save it for deep elims or a bubble round and you still have other stuff to read against them, you just don't maybe want to break this yet. That's the kind of thing that you would hold on to.
Got it.
I have a question. Does this apply to like Ks and performance stuff? Because I've been working on a performance case since like the NDT time,
You
and
don't
like
have to
not that.
put up your
Oh, okay.
performance.
What?
Yeah, performances are very individualistic. You don't have to post them if you don't want to. But it's like if you have racial cap core cards that do like theorizing for racial cap, and there are other people reading racial cap, that is the kind of thing that you should probably make available to everyone. Cool. Um, yeah, we'll say like yeah, this doesn't apply to blocks either. Like you should, there's like bullet point blocks, like say this and then say this and then make this argument. And then there's like your actual speaking style that has been expressed in this evidence kind of block, or like that has been like the evidence is contextualized through your natural speaking style. That kind of stuff, there's no reason to put on a Dropbox. But like bullet point list of say this, and then you do what's called downfiling. You download the file with the blocks, and then you adapt it to whatever your methodology is. So don't just use the files as they appear on the Dropbox. Save them to your personal folder or to your hard drive, and then from there modify them so that they work with whatever system works for you. You should not be reading blocks word for word as they were written by someone else. Your blocks should be written out by you in a way that expresses how you naturally talk. Uh, this thing for blocks. Cool. Uh, File sharing on Discord. There's a file sharing Discord thread. File sharing is disabled on all other channels. Why? Because there's no way to search for file names specifically. And when you're prepping for a round and you're like, oh, there was that one file name, what was it called? You don't want to scroll through a whole bunch of conversations and text and like random posts. You want to, like, you can't search by, well, you can search by channel, but like, you don't want to be like, oh, what channel was it saved on? So all files should be shared on the file sharing Discord, and you should keep your like messages in file sharing very small because the goal is to be able to scroll very easily through the files. So they should have very short descriptions. Okay, formatting uh, as per Meza's request and with some modifications by me. This is the format that folks should be using for their cards. It's author last name, year of publication, the full name of the author, full date, qualifications, publication title, in quotes, URL, page numbers is up for debate, then signature. Why is page numbers up for debate? Because like you don't really technically need it nowadays with OCR. However, you do want to have the ability to like flex that you actually, access the document and you want to make it like accessible to other people because you want other people to make files accessible to you. So it's kind of just like an ethos boost. But is it worth the effort? Only you know. That's on page number. Now, okay, I guess we'll come to a
Only thing
decision.
for me is
Oh,
I know this one's highly debatable for many, but qualifications, is it necessary? Because I have this like extension link or extension downloaded that just cites everything for me, but it doesn't have the qualifications in it. And I know other teams do the same thing. So is it like, do I need qualifications in the card or the
Yes.
citation?
Yes, unless you are citing a news organization, in which case the organization itself and its own peer review method does that for you. So you don't know who, like Jill last name, what Jill's qualifications are because Jill's just a journalist, but like there's an institutional review process. So you for like news publications, I'm gonna be like, sometimes you can't, but like for everything else, always have qualifications, always put it here and like you need it for ethos. You don't want to be like, well, this is like a peer paper and people are like, oh, who's the author? And you can't say anything about the author. Like you should have easy access to information about who your authors are, not just for, answering in cross-exams, but like judges look at a card with no qualifications and they're like, this is meaningless. This is no different from an analytic. Yeah, cool. And then you can use this for site creator. If you don't know how to use site creator, there will be in the tech lecture later. Team files will be highlighted in blue. If you can't see distinguish blue very well, you should let us know. You can recolorize your own like files in a different color, but any file that is in the team Dropbox should be colorized in blue. Any thoughts? No? Okay. Don't use the condense feature in verbatim. So like maintain the original paragraph and page breaks, get rid of the formatting and the URLs, then make the text small, then go back. You can zoom in and like make the words that you want underline. So it retains its original structure, but it you can still efficiently and small in the size of everything else. Thoughts, questions? No? Okay. Don't emphasize full sentences. Emphasis, so like the part of where you have a card and it's like underlined and bold, is about finding important information. Highlighting is used to indicate what is said out loud. Highlighting has to form complete sentences. Emphasis is more so about pointing the eyes to the warrants, the proof that they're actually talking about what it is that you want them to talk about, the key words. Underlining is what connects that with, all the conjunctions and like uh, formal logic. So you see here in this card an example of, like man defined at like this is about proving that we're discussing probably like Sylvia Winter. Um, but is not necessarily like it's about the important stuff so that the judge can be like, oh, that's where the warrants are. Thoughts about this formatting section? No, okay. And don't emphasize full sentences. Naming convention, put, something is bad or something is good or impact core. V, and then like version numbers. Why? Because this is how we reconcile conflicted copies, and it also makes it easier to, like search through your stuff for like old versions. It makes it very clear when something is outdated. If you can just like find something that has a very clear different version number, it prevents situations where you copy two versions of the same file onto the same folder and then one of them replaces the other, and then you don't have access to the original. Thoughts about naming convention? No? Okay, cool. We're only 1 minute over time, I believe. Yay! Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing so that Vaughn can go ahead and begin sharing.
Is the meeting recording? Just making sure.
Does it look like it's record? Yeah, it's recording. I see it. Yep, you're good.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Just to confirm.
Yeah, we can see it.
All right. Um, for this lecture, I'm going to be going over like the topic, some important things that everyone should know about collective bargaining and the different types and how it works. Uh, so this year's resolution, as a reminder, is that the United States federal government should substantially strengthen collective bargaining rights for workers in the United States. Uh, the keywords that I think in the resolution mainly is like collective bargaining rights, but also substantially strengthen, and in the United States. And I'll talk about that a bit later. Uh, but this is like the baseline for what AFs will defend. I also think that the way this resolution is worded, you can probably expect to find AFs that just defend the whole resolution without changing much, and then arguing for like different advantages from defending the entirety of the resolution. Uh, for the topic, the core of the topic, of course, is collective bargaining rights. That's kind of like the main controversy of the resolution, which means that we're going to be talking about labor laws a lot. We might not be talking about labor law as much as other teams if we're reading the critique, but we'll still be talking about, or at the very least, answering affirmatives that amend laws or reference past laws that were either good or bad for labor rights and labor law. And most AFs will talk about unions. And if they don't, then they're like questionably topical because the ability to collectively bargain, as we'll talk about, is something that unions do. So this is like the core of the topic. We'll have lots of debates about unions, labor law, collective bargaining rights. It's not mentioned here, but just like the concept of labor is also the core of the topic for K teams. Who's able to like come to the table and negotiate, who's able to work, what is work, what is labor, are some important parts of the topic. So what is collective bargaining? Collective bargaining defined is the process where workers through a union usually negotiate with employers over wages, benefits, hours, working conditions, other terms of employment. So it shifts bargaining from the individual to the group to give workers more leverage. Uh, collective bargaining happens almost exclusively through unions, which is why I mentioned before that most AFs will have to talk about unions. And this also means that AF just have to like give the ability for workers to come to the table in a stronger way or a way that's different than the status quo. So that's like the bare minimum an AF has to do is it has to allow for bargaining to take place, and then advantages will be based off of like what that bargaining could lead to. So we'll talk about that later as well. So there's different types of collective bargaining. There's like four main types. The first is distributive bargaining, um, sometimes called positional bargaining or win-lose bargaining. And this bargaining is zero sum. So zero sum basically means that if one side were to gain in a situation or a scenario or literally a game, then the other side must lose in that same game or scenario. So the most like basic example of a zero sum game is like rock paper scissors. Like there can only be like a winner if there is a loser. Of course, there's ties, but yeah. Another example of a zero sum game is like chess. So in terms of collective bargaining, this is when the parties see a resource like money, benefits, time, like things that would be beneficial for a worker as fixed. So if the company were to lose money, the workers would gain money, like in that negotiation process. This is really common when negotiating wages, benefits, or hours. The employer might want to minimize the costs that they give. The worker might want to maximize the gains. Ideally, the worker would end up winning the trade, and the um, employee or the employer would lose. Like that's the union's perspective, and it's the opposite. But distributed bargaining is just like ideally we win and they lose. Integrative bargaining is the second type. This is often regarded as a win-win scenario. So when we have integrative bargaining, parties look for benefits on both sides. So we look for mutual gains. This is a bit more difficult to do in practice because most bargaining is zero sum. Like if you were to pay workers more, that money has to come out of your employer's pocket. So they end up losing. So it's kind of hard to make integrative bargaining work. So you have to get creative. Um, so you want to like trade things that are high value to one side, but low cost to the other. So it doesn't always involve like money, for example, in integrative bargaining. So an example might be like the workers are striking or bargaining, and they want like a shorter work week. Um, that shorter work week you can argue would lead to better like work-life balance, which would increase productivity in the workspace, which might increase profit. So it's a win-win because we work 4 days a week, but we also make the company more money. And productivity is usually the employer's like winning side. Um, so this matters because it's a bit different than distributed bargaining, but it still is a form of collective bargaining. Next is concessionary bargaining. This is where the workers give back benefits. This is probably from a union perspective, the worst place to be. So, for example, um, if the if this were to happen, the union would give back like a previously won wage or benefit. So, like, let's say in the past, I'm a union representative, and we collectively bargained and got our wage $25 an hour. But then a recession hit. Now, because we're in an economic downturn, the quality of work, quality of life in work is going down. So I may give back some of my wage. Like I'll agree to give you more of my paycheck. So I make $23 an hour now, or maybe I just make $20 an hour from 25 in exchange for less time working or like doing less intensive tasks or something of that nature. So this is where people ideally like don't want to be. And it's often framed as temporary. So like you'll get your benefits back, but oftentimes it doesn't. It can become permanent. An example of this is during the recession of '08. A lot of airline union workers agreed to wage freezes or pay cuts in exchange for keeping the pilots and crew employed. So because it was hard to like pay people and the economy was just horrible in 2008, airline workers agreed to take a pay cut just to stay employed, just to have a job. So it very much concessionary, but also like necessary from the eyes of a worker. Um, and yeah, so like ideally the company like in some level has to survive. Otherwise, people lose their jobs. And if people lose their jobs, they can't like put food on the table. So that's where concessionary bargaining comes in. Most unions are not entering bargaining agreements from the perspective of like concessions. They're entering from a distributive bargaining point and trying to uplift their workers the best they can, or an integrated bargaining point to try to be more creative. But usually in recessions, concessionary bargain is a big thing. So if the economy were to like go down, which it totally could soon, concessionary bargaining could be a thing. And then the fourth type of bargaining is sectoral bargaining. So this covers an entire industry instead of a single workplace. It was, instead of like a workplace or a company, I guess like makes a bit more sense. This is pretty common in Europe, but it's very rare in the US. So in Europe, there is like sectoral bargaining. So you have bargaining for like auto mechanics, bargaining for teachers, and it wouldn't be like for one school, but like for a district. This is very different from America because in America, bargaining is usually per workplace. So even if there's like unions that have different like places where they go, like for example, is like Teamsters or something, they like bargain within that workplace. So like for example, if I'm like a union worker at Disneyland, that union doesn't necessarily mean that I like get gains at Disney World if I'm at Disneyland because they're two separate workplace locations. Sectoral bargaining, the benefit is that it creates like a unified standard. So it deletes or like erases the race to the bottom in wages and benefits because it captures like a wide net. So, for example, if sectoral bargaining were a thing for fast food workers in America, if I negotiate better wages, it would do so for like every fast food place, Wendy's, Burger King, Taco Bell, you name it. Denmark is a place that had this for their construction sector. They had sectoral bargaining, so they like won wage increases in Denmark, and that applied to every construction worker, regardless of company. So this could be a way to like quickly scale up impacts of like the economy or something, like increasing everyone's money increases payments vastly. That's how I imagine it to be employed. But overall, for the types of collective bargaining, I feel like maths probably won't spec collective bargaining. There might be an argument that you can force them to spec. Otherwise, the 2AC can shift what kind of bargaining happens. But I don't know how useful that is. But we'll see what happens at Northwestern with like the types of bargaining because the resolution doesn't specify. So there's different pieces of relevant law as well for the resolution. And I think these three right here are laws you should absolutely know. And if you've been cutting cards, you probably have come across these. If you are in a debating on a policy act, these laws will probably be mentioned somewhere in the act, but you should become familiar with them because these might be like central points of an act. So the first one is the National Labor Relations Act, passed in 1935. This act is also called the Wagner Act. The act, it basically protects the rights of private sector employees. It says that they are able to unionize, they're able to bargain collectively, and they can engage in protected activities. All of this has the goal of improving working conditions. So if there is a piece of legislation that like enables collective bargaining, it is the NLRA. Like that is what establishes the right to collectively bargain. This was passed in 1935 to address power imbalances between employers and agencies. If you go to nlrb.gov, all of this is there and more. And like, it's a good way to like just learn about like what we're debating about because this is really the core of the topic right here, the National Labor Relations Act. It's managed by the NLRB, which is the National Labor Relations Board is like what that stands for. That's who enforces the NLRA. So there might be affirmatives, I'll talk about this later, that try to amend, improve the NLRB. And then the next important piece of legislation you should know is the Taft-Hartley Act of 1947. This was a direct response to the NLRA. And this act basically amended the NLRA, and it said that we need to have limits on unions. We need to limit the power and activity of unions. The goal was to balance like unions and employers because there was some concern that unions were overreaching after the Wagner Act was passed, the NLRA Act, or the NLRA. So this was basically their way to limit the scope of unions. So both of these acts are concerned with unions. The Taft-Hartley Act, although it's an act, it is an amendment to the NLRA. And it also established right-to-work laws, which we'll talk about a bit later. But all you need to know now is that right-to-work laws limit unions in a kind of tricky way. So yeah, this act, the Taft-Hartley Act, it required put limits on boycotts, picketing. It just made it harder for unions to collectively bargain. And unions had to now be, for the most part, voted on. So if there were let's say there's people, and this is really the work that unions do now, it's helping people unionize. But if there are people that don't know any better and they're just I'm trying to get my bag at McDonald's, they're not going to say I'm going to unionize. There is some level of radicality there and awareness. It's okay, maybe I should unionize to protect my benefits. But making it optional and making it harder to collaborate was kind of the goal of this act. Another important act to know that's not explicitly, covered under the NLRA is the Fair Labor Standards Act, or the FLSA, passed in 1938. This was just an act that introduced minimum wage and overtime. So prior to 1938, people made no money for the most part, unless you worked a very affluent job. Children, practically any age, were able to work, and hours were all over the place. You can make let's say I made 20 cents an hour. I can make 20 cents an hour and work a 20-hour day, working construction or something. Or I can make $3.50 an hour and I can work 12 hours and I would get paid $3.50 all 12 hours. So this introduced minimum wage, which obviously you all know, you all worked jobs before, and overtime. But it also introduced record keeping. So now companies had to track hours, which is why we do that now. And it introduced child labor standards. So some people were not able to work based on their age, and children could not do insane jobs like construction anymore. But prior to that, that was totally fine. So these are important pieces of relevant law. These are honorable mentions. I say honorable mentions because they're not necessarily important. They're important. They might be in AFs. I just think they're important to think about some of this stuff. So the first one is the Railway Labor Act, or the RLA. This passed in 1926, and this didn't have as much strength as the NLRA passing, because it didn't set the groundwork for statewide collective bargaining. But the idea was that picketing and boycotts were disrupting interstate commerce. So they said, instead of doing that, railway workers should come to the table, which kind of set some groundwork for the NLRB to come about, and the Wagner Act. Another one is the Civil Service Reform Act. This act itself, you don't have to necessarily memorize it, but there is an important implication about this act. The CSRA, passed in 1978, granted collective bargaining rights to many federal workers. So the NLRA did not establish a right to bargain for federal workers. Federal workers, because they worked for the government, did not really have a say in their job. This act changed that, and it allowed them to bargain, but it only allowed them to bargain on issues of hours and workplace standards, but wages are still off the table. So there might be AFs that spec federal workers I feel like back in AP US history. Yeah, when I was doing research on this, I was like, I've learned like half of these things, maybe like 25% in A push. That was one of my favorite classes, so it was kind of like a throwback. But yeah, the CSRA enables federal workers to collectively bargain. They're not allowed to strike or picket, and even today, their collective bargaining cannot result in higher wages. Wages are off the table. So I'm assuming that some team is going to make a subset app about federal workers, and it's going to have a bunch of crazy advantages. But the idea is that there could be apps that give federal workers the right to bargain for their wages. And like the government makes a point to like try to pay people a fair wage. Like some government jobs, like they tend to pay like decent. Um, but the reason for that is because it's non-negotiable. Uh, and yeah, the next act is the OSHA, Occupational Safety and Health Act. This act established the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, also called OSHA. The idea was that there was no safety standards in a lot of places of work. So now every company has to follow a set of standards. I think this one's just important to know because there might be like apps that are aimed at amending this through collective bargaining. Unsafe work environments is like one of the key. Well, and maybe not key. Yeah, it's key. It's like an important issue that people that bargain and unions try to like, change, and many more. There's like a bunch of labor laws, and I'm sure that like squirrely AFs will try to amend like a random labor law. But these are like the most important three are these three, the ones I mentioned before. But these others are fine as well to like know of. So why collective bargain? The main issue is workers' rights. Like that's the general goal. So you want to balance employer power. So typically, the employer, the working in general is like a power dynamic. Your employer has power over you because they pay you. Unioning and collective bargaining gives the worker a bit of a fighting edge. If the worker is facing abuse from their employer in a way that isn't like necessarily reportable to like the government, like poor wages or poor workplace environment, then you can union with other workers to make the life better, and also just to let the employer know that their powers are not, infinite. We have a check on your powers. Union members also make more money. I think the number was like, I think 20% more on average. So unions are pretty successful. They're dying now, which I'll talk about like on the next slide, I think. But even if they're dying, the unions that are alive are successful. On average, if you are a union member, you probably make more money in that same profession than if you are not a union member. So it's a good idea to join a union. Unions also fight for healthcare, pension, and paid leave. They assist in support, and they improve workplace safety, like the OSHA standards. If your work environment is unsafe, you can obviously report it to OSHA, but a part of that is sometimes bargaining. They may meet the bare minimum of OSHA, which is why some AFs may amend OSHA or argue that their collective bargaining leads to amending OSHA. But the workplace can still be an unsafe environment. So the main challenge to collective bargaining rights in a nutshell is that we need more collective bargaining rights, which is why I'm assuming this topic got chosen. You can still talk about a litany of labor issues, and collective bargaining rights arguably could help resolve them. So one big issue right now is that union membership is declining. There are less unions, less people joining unions, and a part of this is because of right to work laws, which I'll talk about briefly, and then we'll talk about more later. But part of this is also just a lack of education and a lack of policies that are forwarding union membership and collective bargaining rights. So union membership is declining right now. In addition to them declining, employers are resisting unions. So employers, from the company's point of view, unless you're like a very ethical employer, most companies do not like unions. They think that it takes away their money. They think that it, just creates more administrative hassles. So employers are resisting unions now. Right to work laws also exist. So I'll talk about right to work laws more later, but I guess to define it really quickly, these are laws that prohibit requiring an employee to join a union or pay union dues. And then gig economy jobs. This is probably going to be a decent app, I feel, but like gig workers do not have collective bargaining rights. Most independent contractors do not have the ability to bargain, do not have benefits, and their employment is almost always at will. A lot of employment is, but their employment is especially at will, which we'll also talk about. But these are like some challenges to collective bargaining. 3K is crazy. I remember that actually. Yeah. There's not a lot of protections for workers in general, but especially if you're like not an employee of the company, your protections are really bad. So topicality. So there is a few words in this resolution that I think are important for topicality. Obviously, if you're reading a KF, then you want to impact turn a lot of these ideas. But if you are debating just any app, I think that the topic is large enough that topicality is something that might want to go in your 1 and C. So the first thing is substantially. I think substantial debates are like interesting and boring at the same time. But for labor, it's kind of interesting because it questions like what is the magnitude of change. So the plan might not be significant in scope. Like if I say that we ought to increase collective, or I'm LD brain, we should increase or strengthen collective bargaining rights for like what's a small working group? Like clowns, for example, like strengthen collective bargaining rights for clowns. I doubt that's like substantial. Like I don't know how big the clown market is. I'm assuming it's really small. Gig workers might also be like questionably substantial, although I think it would pass a substantial test. But substantial debates are kind of interesting because you can kind of like arbitrarily set the bar and then define why your arbitrary like definition is better. So like 50%, 10%, stuff like that. Strengthen is another important word. Strengthen is just like, do you actually like I like liken strength to increase basically. So like if the plan doesn't increase their collective bargaining rights or add on to what they already had, because some of these AFs will address collective bargaining rights for people that already have access to collective bargaining rights, right? So I think that you want to ensure that they're actually increasing collective bargaining rights. So an example would be like if the app changes a process for union representation. I don't know exactly how that would look like. Maybe it's like a voting mechanism. If they change a voting mechanism for how unions represent people, that wouldn't substantially or that wouldn't strengthen or substantially strengthen rights. Main keyword being strengthened, because then the rights are the same. You just change the process. So I doubt this will be like huge, but it could be something for strengthen. Substantially is probably more common though, as an answer against like subset Fs. Collective bargaining rights. So sometimes Fs may not actually strengthen collective bargaining. It would be kind of bold to do so, but there's bound to be an F. There's always an F that's like just not topical, but then they say like, oh, like this makes it topical, or at worst we're like extra T or FX T. But to like read T against a collective, like using the collective bargaining rights definition, you would want to question if what the act does is like necessarily strengthening collective bargaining rights, or is it strengthening something else, right? So let's say I have like a jobs guarantee act, and then I say like giving a jobs guarantee means that everyone now has some collective bargaining rights because now everyone gets a job, like if they want one, right? But the problem with that is I didn't necessarily strengthen collective bargaining rights. Like at worst, it's an effect of the plan, but it's not actually like the plan. Uh, Next is workers. So like who counts as a worker? Uh, so some people may argue that different identities, or not identities, I guess work identities, are not workers. So independent contractors, for example, are like debatably workers. Like you can probably define worker to mean employee. There's probably like labor law definitions that say that, but then there's probably more like common definitions that say like a worker is simply someone who works, which is probably more acceptable, more reasonable. Um, the app that, like the original version of the app that David and Jonathan are working on with like prison workers, questionably workers, right? Because all the evidence is like these workers are not seen as employees. Like obviously the app would critique that, but also that means like your app is not about employees. So if employees equals workers, then yeah. And then last, United States. So um, the end of the resolution says in the United States. That is debatable, right? So like Puerto Rico, could I have a Puerto Rico app? Like maybe, maybe not, because that's like a territory. Like, do territories count as United States? Sometimes in debates, people say no. Apps that are questionably foreign, or maybe apps that cooperate with other nations, if they were to do that. This probably wouldn't be too common, but based on resolutional wording, you're bound to have a debate about in the United States. This is not to be confused with United States federal government at the top of the resolution. This is like the end of the resolution. But these are like the topicality things. Okay. So there's different app cases that will probably be read. These are like the big board assignments. So I'm just going to spend some time talking about like what each of these are, because if you weren't assigned it, you probably don't necessarily know. And I also want to preface this with saying that affirmatives will not necessarily have to like include this stuff in the plan text. And these also aren't necessarily advantage areas. So like I can have an advantage about the economy, and then part of my internal link could be like reforming NLRA, and the plan reforms the NLRA or something like that. So the first one we actually already talked about, and it's sectoral or broad-based bargaining. So this is like when collective bargaining extends across an entire occupation, an industry, a region, basically more than one singular workplace. This is probably most likely to be like an entire app. I mean, all these could be entire apps, but this is definitely like probably going to be common, because there's a lot of literature on why sectoral and broad-based bargaining would be a good idea. It sometimes happens in the United States, but it's mainly in Europe as of right now. Current labor laws in the US emphasize enterprise-based bargaining, which is the opposite. So like when unions negotiate with individual employers on behalf of a group of workers at a particular work site. So it's very small, it's very localized. If AFs want to argue for a large scale change, they'll probably say the app increases sectoral bargaining, which is collective bargaining. Especially since the like evidence now says that union rates are low. People are not joining unions. But unions do have benefits. Like imagine those benefits on a broad scale. Obviously, negative arguments would say this would destroy the economy. or K's would say this just valorizes work or labor. But this is like probably a core AF area. The next um, like AF case area is corporate governance. And this one, so this is a system that exists mainly in Germany right now. But the idea is that employees have a voice in the management of the company, usually through representation, like on the board of directors or something. So like everyone has a part in governing the organization, which is very different from like normal companies in like most places, honestly. Like you work at, like, let's say you work at McDonald's, you don't immediately get a say in like what the company does or how it governs itself. You just like flip the patties, right? But this would change that. So you would work at McDonald's, and then as an intro or a welcome to working at McDonald's, you would also be on the board of directors. So you would be a part of a large democratic body that governs decisions, which is why it's called co-determination. Uh, it differs from traditional collective bargaining, where unions negotiate with employers for better wages. Um, this is arguably a form of collective bargaining. So this would theoretically increase collective bargaining rights because now you're bargaining at the table. Like you don't even need the union at this point. Like you can use the union to get to the point of corporate governance, but once you are at the table, you're at the table. Like you're theoretically, your opinion matters as much as every other person at the table. So that's a potential AF area. Like I said, most of the lit is about this in Germany because it mainly exists in Germany. And we're like cutting cards about this yesterday, I think, was doing it with David. And there's a guy like named Jeff Demans or something, and he hates this. He really doesn't like corporate governance. Like he wrote like 3 different articles just saying like corporate governance is bad. I think he's German too. But yeah, it's not really a thing anywhere else. And the main idea is workers should have a say in their labor. The next type is secondary action, mainly boycotting. Secondary action refers to actions taken by workers or their union against a party that's not directly involved in the primary labor dispute. The goal is to pressure the primary employer to meet demands. So this would often target like a supplier, a parent company, a company related to the business but is not the business, and it would disrupt their operations. So it's secondary because it doesn't disrupt the primary employer. So like if I work at McDonald's and I want to take secondary action, I wouldn't like go to my McDonald's and like just stop working and protesting at my McDonald's. I would maybe go to like where the patties come from or the chicken or something. I don't know. And then protest there. Or try to disrupt their operations. Maybe boycott. Sympathy strikes are a thing where people strike on behalf of other people at other locations. Picketing is a thing. AFs can go different ways with this. It's low-key bidirectional. So secondary action is a thing that like could be good. And collective bargaining rights, like expanding union power, might lead to more of this. But AFs can also say that collective bargaining rights might stop or reduce secondary action because demands will start being met if there's more collective bargaining rights, which means there's no need for it. And then either way, that can be linked to like an econ scenario or something. Because the whole point of secondary action is to disrupt flow of a company, just not the direct company that you work for, but to the point where it would still affect that direct company that you work for because they have ties to who you're picketing, ties to who you're boycotting. The next is NLRA reform. So we talked about how the NLRA is very large. It's a very large piece of legislation, and it got amended with the Taft-Hartley Act. NLRA reform would ideally expand the NLRA, one thing that I think of immediately is that public sector employees under the NLRA do not have benefits. And while the CSRA expanded benefits for um, federal workers, they still can't negotiate wages, which is something the NLRA gives, right? So maybe there might be an app that expands the NLRA. This would probably be the mechanism to enable workers to negotiate their wages, the NLRA. But there might be other arguments for why expanding the NLRA would be good, or at least reforming it to change what it looks like. The other three, so there's jobs guarantees. So this is questionably topical, like I said before, because a job guarantee doesn't necessarily strengthen collective bargaining rights, at least not directly. But the idea of a job guarantee is that the government guarantees a job to every working age person who wants one. So you are not forced to work with the jobs guarantee. But if you want a job, the idea is you are able to get a job. The quality of the job also differs. So, like, some critics of the job guarantee say that you would be giving out like menial jobs that no one wants and that are unfulfilling. Lots of criticisms about like both the critical conceptions of a job guarantee, like it kind of pathologizes people who can't work. Like, you're guaranteed a job, but you cannot work. So what do? It assumes that like people are all able to work, but also like economically, like it would probably reduce productivity. Because if you know that you're always guaranteed a job, why would you work hard at that job? Like, it'd be like quiet quitting, but without the like you just stay there forever. And if you end up getting fired, you're always guaranteed another one. So that would probably crash the economy. But most people who advocate for a jobs guarantee, they argue for a non-poverty wage. So I use this term because there's like a lot of discrepancies. Like, some people say that we should just have like a minimum wage increase. Some people say a living wage, and some people say a non-poverty wage. And I think non-poverty is like mostly the consensus. The idea is that you should be guaranteed a job that pays you something that lifts you out of poverty. But it seems like that in some instances is less than a living wage. So there also might be apps that just straight up say like, and we give a living wage as a part of that process, or like maybe that's a benefit of collective bargaining rights. But yeah, that's the jobs guarantee. Next is at-will employment. These apps, this doesn't have to be a complete app. This can also be like a part of an app. But the idea of at-will employment, and this is kind of how work just exists today, the idea is that you can be terminated or fired at any time. And you can also quit your job at any time. But, you know, that goes both ways, because if you get fired at any time, that sucks. For any reason or no reason at all, as long as it's not an illegal reason. So you can't get fired because of like discrimination. Like, your employer can't say like, I don't like your race, I don't like your like gender, you're fired. However, they can like mask any like suspicious or bad reason for firing someone with another thing. Because at-will employment that's how it works. So it's obviously bad. There's no true job security in a world where employment is at will. There are like people that say there's benefits to this, like it makes employers flexible. And the opposite of this is good cause or just cause employment. So you need to have like a very good and documented cause for why you're letting someone go or firing them. And this has to hold up in court, essentially, like legally. Right now, that's not really a thing in America for the most part. Most employers use at-will employment. It's kind of just a standard. There might be an app where you can argue collective bargaining leads to just cause employment, and then write the work laws. So I mentioned this like quite a bit, but didn't really talk about it a lot because I didn't want to like repeat myself a bunch. But right to work laws, what I did mention is that they prohibit requiring employees to join a labor union. Basically, under right to work laws, you cannot be forced to join a labor union. Uh, and while that like it's painted as like this is great for you as a worker because like you don't want to like be forced to join a labor union, like they're kind of coercive and they bother you. Like you can just check this box that says no thank you, like if we have a union, or you don't have to talk to the union people at all. Like you have the right to work, right? But the problem is that in doing so, this actually weakens labor unions, which leads to lower wages and benefits because people say, oh, well, I don't have to join a union. So why would I even hear them out? Because unions are like extra steps. So people that support right to work laws say that these laws protect individual workers' freedom. You get the freedom to do what you want. But ultimately, they harm the economic well-being of workers and communities, which may in turn harm the economy or something larger. But based on research, like a lot of people agree that like right to work laws are bad. There's just a lot of people from unions writing about it, and the arguments for like why they're good are pretty bad. Like having individual freedom to join a union or not. The only like I think um, generally for a lot of these arguments, a criticism is the best way to answer these. Aside from like the app just can't solve it because the structure of labor is bad, but also for the right to work law specifically, this is like I guess Jonathan's not here, but Jonathan would probably like this. But I feel like if you have a piece of evidence that says right to work laws, like increase individual workers' freedom to join or not join a union, an app that gets rid of right to work laws would violate like a Kantian framework. And I know Jonathan is reading Kant because he's a nerd. I don't recommend anyone else to read it, but like that is I put this in here for him to listen to that because I'll probably forget it. But that would probably be like the only defense of why right to work laws are good because absent right to work laws, you probably violate a Kantian framework, and we can probably cook with that because Kant is fun. But yeah, for all this stuff, I would recommend just critiquing it. There's actually a lot of literature on like why jobs guarantees fail, like why they're bad. Same for like corporate governance, because the stuff in Germany doesn't really work well. But for like right to work laws and at will employment, like these are kind of true. Like maybe we shouldn't just fire people. Maybe we should like put people in unions. So those are where you just go heavy on critiques. Kant sucks. Mills would say racism is against the categorical imperative, but I don't know if Kant would say that. Okay. App advantage areas. Poverty is a big one. Like if there are soft left apps, this is like some of this stuff might not be in the app, but it might be like how the app like link turns decay. So like poverty is obviously bad. We should expect teams to say the app uplifts people out of poverty, slow death, famine, struggling people. Like all this is good. Like even if capitalism is bad, doesn't mean we should like jettison, people who are going hungry. The economy is another one. I think a lot of apps are going to have economy advantages. So it might be beneficial for us to have an economy disad if people plan on reading disads. Just something really simple, like the app is not good for the economy. It doesn't even have to be read as a DA. It can just be read as like a case turn, kind of like the finance DA that we had last year. But just in general, like every advantage, at least one advantage of most apps will be like the app increases innovation and productivity, which helps the economy. Economic decline causes extinction, nuclear war, great power war, etc. So having a turn to that would be really good because that's just going to be common. Workplace democracy might be another advantage. This is very much a link turn to the K, giving essentially like putting us in some sense the means of production into the hands of the worker. Like the earlier example, the McDonald's worker that has a say on what the company does has so much more power than the McDonald's worker who just goes in to their shift and flips patties. So this is like the corporate governance and co-determination stuff. This could also go existential. Like there's a lot of cards that say democracy puts a cap on different existential impacts. It enables international cooperation. This might be the internal link to that because I feel like a lot of teams, even on domestic topics, will somehow link the app to international cooperation and then link that to drawing in like China and Russia, but like democracy would like put a cap on that. Like the internal links are kind of silly, but like they typically exist. Health and pandemics might be another thing, kind of going on like the OSHA stuff, safety standards. I feel like AFs can generally say that they make like the world cleaner, they make the world healthier, they stop the spread of diseases. There can also be like subset AFs about nurses or doctors, probably nurses, and how nurses are key to stopping the spread of diseases. I think an internal link I saw before is like nurses. It's not that they like literally cure the diseases, but they are in close proximity with diseased people. And then the app would somehow resolve that. Like again, like a pretty like bad internal link, but yeah. Union power is going to be extremely common, if not every single policy app. The app, by nature of strengthening collective bargaining rights, the app strengthens unions because individual people do not collectively bargain. So union power can have a litany of arguments. The economy, unions key to check different things like human rights abuses. So this can go like as a kind of link turn style argument against cap arguments, or just an advantage against like anything. And the last thing is K ground on the app. There's a lot of K ground on the app because I think the K apps are not limited to like collective bargaining, but they still get to make arguments about them. So I think some things I thought about were like who is able to negotiate, like who should come to the table, who historically has been excluded from the negotiation table. Like if we were to actually strengthen collective bargaining rights, who would not get those benefits? And a big part of this is that, you know, the topic is so focused on work and labor that it kind of ignores the people that don't work or don't labor. It's one of my favorite arguments, like answering the Cat K, like the lumpen proletariat style arguments. And I think those arguments should probably enter AFs at some point or something similar. Arguments about labor in relation to debate, like who labors in debate, how do we labor in debate, what does our labor go to in debate, are like some critical arguments that you can make on the AF or the neg, really. And just like questioning what it means to like be a worker as well. Kind of like the prison app does, but most critical apps will probably do that as well. Like who is in the category of the worker historically or presently. So there's a lot of like app advantage areas. But I think the consensus is that the cap K is going to be huge on this topic. The K in general is going to be huge because a lot of apps borrow from like Mark, or a lot of authors borrow from Marx anyway. So the K is going to be huge. Most apps will probably get access to all their normal scenarios, but they might not read them against you all because of like the nature of being a K debater. So there might totally be worlds like rounds where you debate like an app, and the app is literally just like 9 minutes of like poverty is horrible, people in unions are suffering, the app lifts them out of poverty, not for economic reasons, but because like the world sucks under capitalism, the app makes it a tiny bit better. I definitely think that people are going to be like essentially making link turn the app and then waiting for the like 1NC to be like the K that they already link turn. And I think that in response to that, like you can just critique work in general. Like that offense doesn't assume like work being bad. Then you just have that debate. Other debates that are talked about, like the vanguardism debate, and how we approach these problems. And then also, depending on like your style as a debater, you might also just want to like straight up impact turn these things. Not saying like poverty good, but like reading like the economy DA or like another thing that I think will be good is process as well because um for one there's different organizations and also like a lot of these laws are actually administered and governed at the state level. So the state's counterplan um should be competitive, but also just other processes you might find, and then other cool weird counterplans as well. Like we're talking about like Namo and WordPix, like just forcing people to defend things they're not ready to defend. Because I feel like the general idea of a lot of these apps, like in my opinion, they're good ideas. Like it's because like giving people working rights is probably good. Um, so making them defend things they're uncomfortable with, representations, smaller things, is probably ideal. The other ideal would be just like going to the other extreme and just being like you kill the economy, you piss off other countries, like stuff like that. Either way, like just a lot of offense. Because some arguments might sound defensive if the app is already like, yeah, we make lives better for people who are struggling. So those are like my thoughts on like app and then like some neg answers. And all the like the other slide about the app cases, those are like case neg things that we're working on. No, like there's no like 100% chance that like they'll all be read. Like we don't know, but there's like a good chance that a lot of this will be made like in debates, and we'll just have to see how the meta shapes out at the first tournament. Um, but yeah, I have 3 minutes for any like questions or thoughts or checking the chat. I haven't checked the chat. 21 messages. But yeah, that's it. The lumping. Yeah, the lumping. Yeah, I think racial cap's going to be very big on this topic. But yeah, that's it.
Landon, can you say a little bit more about your thoughts on
Yeah.
labor and debate about labor and debate?
Yeah. I think that if in these debates, if we let it be about the content of the affirmative, we are going to lose if they like pick a true obvious statement that's like unions are good or like right to work is bad. And that in those debates you have to recognize that the fiat K, like first of all, don't just have the fiat K. We need like five flavors of it. It needs to be like kind of multi-layered and built into a couple of other things. But I do think the question of like, what do you do and a performative pushback, it is the way to win that debate. Like that it's just really gonna, I think when the policy AF gets to shotgun something that is like an obvious, intuitive, good idea, the strategic pivot necessary is to lean into what their role is and who are they to speak on like let's take the example of Emory, like that sophomore returning junior Danny. His dad was on the Federal Reserve, like one of the most powerful financial actors in the country, and he is role playing helping reduce poverty. Like why don't you go fix pop? Does it make sense? I feel like the questions that are raised, I don't mean to target him particularly, but I did find out that fact about his dad being on the Federal Reserve, and I cannot let that go because last year that was their AF. So like I don't know. I think the desire for some of these teams to role play other people's living conditions and to take something and abstract and make it it's theoretical instead of material about the people in the room, that is our opportunity to defeat them. And so our argument should have that built in from the beginning. But that fiat K is like way good against soft left half. It's not great against everything. Does it make sense? I think there's a number of affirmatives where it's maybe not the best answer. Um, but I think Cap K with organizing stuff alongside you don't do anything, that it will go a long way.
Love that. What's next on the schedule, y'all?
I think it's lunch until 12:30.
Yeah, we have a 1 hour lunch.
Nat, we can barely hear you. It's like you sitting away from your earplugs, your headphones, talking, and we can hear you through the headphones, but it's almost like you're like 10 feet away from. Okay, so we're gonna take this hour-long lunch break. um, we will meet back here after that. David, I would like to know where your partner is. And go ahead.
He's at TDI. He's at a
Oh,
camp right now. He was here in the morning. Yeah, he talked with all the coaches or like an hour earlier before work week was actually supposed to start.
okay, bet. So I'm gonna basically try to start posting these recordings to Dropbox. Nat, do we have a new Dropbox or are we still using our old Dropbox for now?
Can you hear me now? Is
I can't.
better?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So my recommendation was gonna be that we post them on YouTube as unlisted, and then we post the links to minimize like Dropbox space.
Okay.
Um, yeah.
Okay. I'll try to get to that as soon as possible then. um, and then Crizel, sometime this afternoon can oh, thanks, Crizel. How do I send you the video for you to do it for me?
When you save it, if you save it to the cloud, it just email you a link, I believe. If you share that link with me, I can figure out how to do that on my own YouTube stuff because I've already done that with meetings with Natalie. So